Hello, bosses! Emily Aries here, the founder and CEO of Bossed Up, and welcome to today's Power Lunch with Brigid Schulte. This is part of our Fierce Fall series of amazing conversations with incredible women who've crafted their careers with passion and purpose. I'm so excited to see women from all over the country have joined in to today's webinar. And a lot of you, I know, I'm seeing some familiar names from Bossed Up Bootcamp, our flagship training for women navigating career transition, and from the Fierce Fall Challenge, our 10-week challenge to achieve our biggest remaining goal of the year before Thanksgiving. Today actually marks that halfway point. We're in week 5 of the Fierce Fall Challenge. And so it's so fitting that in the midst of this sort of communal goal achievement challenge that we feature Brigid Schulte, who's an award-winning Washington Post journalist, best-selling author of Overwhelmed, Work, Love, and Play When No One Has the Time, a book I absolutely love, and the new director of some incredible programs at the New America organization that's here in Washington, D.C., focusing on breadwinning and caregiving and the Good Life Project, which we're going to hear a lot more about in just a few moments. I want to first mention the structure of today's conversation. Brigid and I will have a couple of questions and answers and dialogue going back and forth, and your questions are welcome at any point in time. I want to start off by making use of that chat bar where you can communicate with all of us in the room together by sharing your Fierce Fall goal. Tell us what it is that you're striving for this season when there's so much to be done before the holidays strike, and really when all of us here at Bossed Up are women who want to craft happy, healthy, and sustainable career paths, balancing our ambition with our sustainability. Share a little bit about what's going on in your neck of the woods. Tell us where you're calling in from or joining us from and what it is that you're striving towards. That way we can not only champion each other and share resources right here in the chat room, but we can also cater today's questions and answers to really speak to your needs. So without further ado, I'm going to have Brigid tune in with her webcam. She's tuning in from Washington, D.C. at New America. Thanks so much for joining us, Brigid.
Oh, great to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, I'm geeking out a little bit because I read Overwhelmed a while ago when it first came out, right? I was at your book launch event in Washington, D.C., and I absolutely love the story of how not only we could talk about the fact that you were an incredibly award-winning journalist at the Washington Post for over 15 years, and I'm going to go back to that because I want to sort of cater to our community's interest in how we get started in careers that we love. But my heart was won with Overwhelmed. I saw the title of the book. I actually Instagrammed it, and all of Bossed Up's followers were like, this speaks my language. And I'd love to hear the story of how this book came to be. A lot of times I've heard that we write the books we need to read ourselves, and I wonder if that's the case for you, Brigid.
Well, I absolutely needed to read this book. I didn't, there wasn't anything like it out there, when I most needed it. But I'm ashamed to say I didn't set out to write it. It really is something that completely opened my eyes. It changed the way I think. It changed the way I live. It was a complete accident that I even wrote this book. So I absolutely needed to read it. But I was too damn busy. And I was stuck in kind of like this spiral, and I was working all the time, and I was trying to be this, crazy mother, and, I staged D-Day for my son's 8-year-old birthday. It's like, I turned the backyard into Mount Olympus for my daughter's birthday. I mean, it was over the top crazy. And, I never had time for myself. I never exercised. I had put on 30 pounds. I was like really overweight and not healthy and breaking out in like stress eczema all the time.
Wow.
Going to the doctor, and it's just like, what is this? And he just goes, my job's to fix it, not to tell you how you got it. You deal with that, and I never slept. I was getting like maybe 5 hours of sleep a night. So I was crazy, and then I have been a longtime Washington Post reporter, and I was part of this group at the time. This is a couple years ago. And we were looking at readership numbers. This is before the flip to digital, because I think that's really changed everything.
Yeah.
But when you looked at the print newspaper, and we were starting to see this big gap between men and women in terms of who was reading the newspaper. And so the powers that be were really concerned about that, because what I didn't know, and I'd written for the newspaper for years, was that women over 50 were the most loyal newspaper readers. So if you had not instilled a habit of reading newspapers in younger women, you extrapolate that out a couple decades, you don't have your strongest and most loyal market, which I was like, wow, you could read the newspaper and never know that women over 50 were your most loyal market. You'd think that testosterone fueled men were the most important market.
Yeah, based on coverage, sure.
Right. No, they're just running things. They're not reading it. But so at any rate, so I was part of this women readers committee to try to figure out, well, why aren't women reading the newspaper, and how can we, get them to read the newspaper? And I walked into the room, and there was just all women sitting around, and we looked at each other. It's just like, I know why women aren't reading the newspaper. It's like, we don't read the newspaper in the morning, and we work for the newspaper because mornings are like freaking crazy, right? Mm-hmm. And even if you've got kids, it's insane. Or like, people are taking care of their elderly parents, and they're trying to everybody getting out the door. Even if you don't have kids, it's crazy, and you're checking your emails, and now you've got social media and all this kind of stuff. You're just trying to run out the door. And so before the day even starts, you're kind of breathless. And so we said, women are just too busy to read the newspaper. That must be why they're not reading it. And so being journalists, we wanted to get the data, and I didn't know anything. I don't know if anybody tracked data like this, how busy women are. So I basically just went to Google. Are women busy? Or just put in some really random search terms. And I discovered this whole field of social science research that I had never heard of before, called time use research, where they ask people to keep time diaries, and then, like, what did you do in a 24-hour period? And and then they kind of make all of these different analyses, like what men do with their time, what women do with their time, what parents do with their time. And so basically, all this time use researcher up, and he's like, I said, we figure women aren't reading the paper because they're too busy. And he's like, wrong. Women aren't busy.
I really bristled at that part of the book too, because he basically looked at your life and was like, you've got plenty of free time, right?
He did. Yeah. He said,
I was like,
right. Oh, it's like, I was, if he'd been nearby, I'm kind of worried what I might have done. It's like, you're out of your mind. I don't have 3 hours of leisure. And he said, yes, you do. Come and do a time study, and I will show you where your leisure is. And so it was really only because he laid down that challenge. And frankly, it just pissed me off so much.
Yeah.
That I was just like, so I walked into this women readers group the next day. But again, I was ready to write it off. Like, oh, here's one more kind of man who has no idea what my life is like, telling me everything about what I'm supposed to be feeling and living. And unfortunately, I'm just that much older than you, that's not all that unusual. That's been kind of the history of my life, in women in my generation. There's men in power, and they tell you what things are supposed to be like, and you're just supposed to, hop to, sir, yes, sir, you know better. Mm-hmm. And so I just like, I had it, but I walked into this women readers group, and I said, God, can you believe here's another guy telling me about my life? And can you believe what this guy said? Kind of to laugh it off.
Right.
And honestly, it was the woman who was leading the women readers group, who was also an editor at the Washington Post magazine. And, she was most recently my editor as well. And she said, go do the time study and write about it for me. And honestly, that was the only reason this book started, that it really became a whole journey into trying to understand, how do we use our time? Yeah. It really started with sort of like looking for leisure, this elusive leisure. And it really opened up to understand you really can't have this space of leisure without really redesigning how we work, right? Without really reimagining our gender roles, that we are we're really stuck in this kind of crazy, unsustainable overwork culture that affects everybody up and down the socioeconomic ladder, and does not lead to productivity and innovation like we think it does. That was a huge revelation to me. I call myself a recovering workaholic. I always thought more was better, and it's not. Yes. And then we also need to completely reimagine our gender roles. We're stuck. They call it the stalled gender revolution. Yeah. We started making progress, and then we got stuck. And a lot of that is we're kind of playing these old movies. There's a lot of ambivalence in our heads. There's culture wars about like what a good mother should be, what a good family looks like. And because we're still so unsure, we haven't moved policy. We haven't really moved attitudes. And so that's a lot of where that overwhelm comes from, is our, our work culture, our structure, our attitudes, our laws, and our policies are designed for a life that really nobody's living anymore.
The ideal worker, you call it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is this false reality, thinking that like the 1950s male stereotypical worker, you can clock in at 9, clock out at 5, and someone else is holding the home front for you. And that is how I feel the book describes work in America being designed, but that demographic no longer exists. And I can say, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, and it's not just clocking in at 9 to 5. That might have been the ideal worker of the 1950s. But what's really insane is that if you look at the research starting in the 1980s, that we began to clocking in at 6:30 or 7 a.m. and then never clocking out.
Right.
That really, you can see the ratcheting up of not hard work, but overwork. There's a real direct line to the 1980s that things just went insane. So now you've got the point where we're not just working hard, working crazy hard, work among the longest hours of any advanced economy. Right. And I think that we've all drunk the Kool-Aid, and I certainly did, that we have to work these long hours to be innovative and productive and creative. And you know what? Those long hours lead to burnout. They're unsustainable.
Yeah.
And they are the enemy of innovation and productivity. And what we really do need to do is work fewer, more concentrated, effective hours to really take time off.
Love it. So let's talk about that, because you are reading the Bossed Up playbook, which I love, right? We say that burnout work culture is not good for anybody, and it's especially holding women back. So women at Bossed Up tend to be in their mid to late 20s, all the way up into their 30s and beyond. But we really focus on women who are proactively coming into this conversation with the intent to mindfully design lives that we would love. And I just want to make a plug here for Brigid's Time Hacker column at the Washington Post, which actually does that. It sort of walks through case studies of how people can switch from burnout work culture mindset to sustainable success, which is really what we call crafting a life in which work, love, and wellness are all working together. Because that, to me, is what puts us on this path to sustainability. And I would love if you could tell us a little bit more, Brigid, about time confetti, which is sort of the word that comes to mind in terms of how your schedule was designed before. And what are some of the solutions that women can put into practice? Like, what are some of the ways that we can change, get off the burnout work culture path and get onto a path towards sustainable success?
Right. Well, I described it. It was funny that the image came to me. I was working on the magazine story, and it was our son's 11-year-old birthday party. And my husband had just come back from Iraq. He's also a journalist, and he works for NPR. And he'd been in Iraq. He would go to Iraq or Afghanistan. He covers the military, and he'd be gone for 6 months. 6 months, 5 to 6 weeks at a time, twice a year. So I have huge respect for military families and for single parents, because it was really hard to do on your own. And it's funny because he would send a picture and he'd be in a war zone in a, bulletproof vest and a cup of really crappy coffee. And it was weird. I'd feel jealous how insane that is, but mainly because all he had to do was one thing when he woke up, and that was go to work and then eat and sleep, and I felt like I was doing a million different things. So I was clean. So he was in the back porch smoking a cigar, and I was cleaning up, the birthday party, and there was dishes and cake, and we'd had confetti, and there was just all this bursts of little bits of paper everywhere. And I was sweeping up, and I thought, oh my God, that's what my time feels like. A little bit of this, a little bit of that, constantly switching from this to that. And kind of getting this real sense of sadness. What does that ever amount to? You just this mound of stuff that doesn't ever amount to anything. And so there was kind of this profound sort of sad moment that came with that. And so I guess that's what I came to think of when you're feeling overwhelmed and you're kind of not living from your own kind of center, your own sense of what's important to you, and you're kind of reacting to the world around you, that your time can become very much like time confetti. And I guess, what can you do? I think the first most important thing is to understand these very powerful external forces that are at work. Because it is important. There are things that you can do personally to change your mindset. But I like to think about change big, change small.
Yeah.
And you really need to change both of those things. The big change is harder, and you
Yeah.
don't, that might not come till after we die, right? And so
Right.
what can you do to change small, to kind of like put your oxygen mask on? And the more we do that, the more we're able then to have the energy and the time to work together for big change. And that's a lot of what I came to New America. So yeah, so what can you do? What can you do when you're feeling totally stressed and time confetti? So number one, realize that right now we value in corporate America, we value the worker who comes in early, who stays late, who sends emails at 11 o'clock at night, who eats lunch at desk, who never takes action. And right now, for a crazy reason, that's who we think the ideal worker is.
Right.
Okay, so you have to understand that, and that's going to come through in office culture, in performance reviews. That's just out there. And we do need to change that. So, but recognize that that's there. Recognize that on the home front, we're still very stuck in the idea that women should be responsible for home and family and children. And, it's like we let men help, but then they might help physically, but then we're still supposed to be the primary parent keeping all of this stuff in our heads.
Right.
What we don't recognize is that is a lot of mental energy to do that.
It's management, right? Yeah.
It is. And it takes time. And the other thing to recognize then, so you really need to work at, if you're in a partnership, really, what is the bucket of work that needs to get done to make your household run? Come up with a fair way to divide it. It doesn't have to be 50-50, but it has to feel fair. And then the most important thing is come up with standards that you can both agree on. Because if his standards are here and yours are here, then guess what you're going to be doing? You're going to be, I was like, oh, you're an idiot. I'm going to do it for you. And then pretty much you're going to be doing it all. So come up with standards you both can agree to, find a way to keep each other accountable, and make it a system so that you don't have to keep arguing and negotiating. Right. And the other thing I think women really need to do is question themselves. Because we've been for centuries culturally conditioned to be the kind of the keeper of the flame at the home, we tend to think, well, I should do it, or I'm better at it. Right. And I would really urge you, question yourself. I think what heterosexual couples can learn a lot from same-sex couples. They don't have the same gender scripts that we do. Mm-hmm. And so when researchers look at their division of labor, they're a lot fairer because they have these conversations and they don't make the same automatic assumptions. You have to decide who likes to mow the lawn, who's better at cooking, or can you share it? And so it's much more of a fair negotiation and then a renegotiation, because it's like it's not ever done, because life keeps changing. Right. And so I think that we can all take a page from our same-sex couple brethren and sisters and learn how they do it. And so don't make those same kind of unconscious bias, automatic assumptions. I think the most important thing I would say, kind of in that change small. So those are sort of big change things to be aware of, that you can then, like at work, be really focused on what is your mission. Be really focused on where you want to go. And I think, then you can really work at strategies to make the most of your time then, where, recognize that we think in about 90-minute attentiveness cycles. Yep. And so create, get a sense of what your priority is, get a sense of what your mission is. And then, in the first thing in the morning, think about what is the one most important thing to do, not 500 things on your list. Right. The one most important thing. And do it first. Set a 90-minute time block and, turn off the phone, turn off the social email, turn off the email, turn off stuff if you can, close the door if you've got an office, and focus on that most important thing. Because the way I used to work, when I was so, I had a to-do list, 500 items long, and I was never getting anything done. I'd always think, well, I'll just answer these emails and, I'll just get this stuff done. I'll clear my place and then I'll be able to think. Well, then it'd be like 5 o'clock, when it started. And so I spent a lot of time sort of putting out fires and being reactive. Right. And so I did really good work. I've done really good work in my career, but, I could have done a lot more great work if I had been really much more focused on, kind of what do I really want and how do I create space for that. So at work, do that.
I want to stop you right there, Brigid, just because I want to dive into that point. Because one thing we find as women in general, talk about unconscious bias at home, is that the skills it takes to be proactive, the skills it takes to be undistracted in our current workplace, or like what is the current norm in the American workplace, requires assertiveness that women get dinged for, right? The kind of assertiveness that is essential for leadership, but is connotated with women in a negative way. So we know that for 30 plus years, social science has shown this inverse relationship with assertiveness and likability for women. So when we are assertive, we're deemed bitches, right? And when men are assertive, they're bosses. And that's really the crux of what we do here at Bossed Up is unpack that unconscious bias, see how it manifests at work and how it impacts our willingness per se to be proactive about what our priorities are, to say no, to be assertive but strategic. It's a really tough. I like to say it's like tap dancing on a tightrope, right? The sort of the way we've been raised, and the way I see from a lot of high achieving, kick-ass young women in particular, some of whom, like me, burnt out before the age of 25, or some of whom don't see a problem with the overwork sort of lifestyle, is that we're focused on perfecting, performing, and pleasing everybody else. So we take those skills that get us A's at college and go into the workplace saying, what can I do for you, for you, for you? And that leads to that time confetti that you're talking about. So I just want to underline that sort of verbally and highlight and see if you have anything you want to add to that point, how critically important cultivating skills for leadership are, and how that sometimes for women feels contradictory when it comes to being the ideal worker. And that's a tough emotional, like a mindset shift to take, but it's what we focus on at Bossed Up.
Well, I think what's really important for women is to come up with their own definition and their own vision of the ideal worker. That what's out there in corporate America doesn't work for anybody, not for men, not for women. You know, it's really it's unsustainable as well as outmoded and kind of crazy. And it's a great way for corporations to get a whole lot of work out of people without paying them, to be perfectly honest. I mean, that's the bottom line.
Yes.
Okay, so you got to know that that's the water you're swimming in. But when you're talking about, I would think about it more strategically. I wouldn't think about it as necessarily, you don't need to make a big announcement. You don't need to say, I think that there's a way to create this and focus on the work and get the work done and create those kind of, concentration zones where you can get into flow. And then the results are such that people are going to just understand that's the way that you work. And you can set up your email and you can just make it very Mondays from 9 to 11 when I write. And then if there's a problem, it's really more than you come to me with the problem. And you just state it as like, this is my job. This is my mission. This is the time that I'm going to do it. If you need me, I'll be available at 11. If it's an emergency, call me. Because I'm turning my email off because I really need to concentrate. But then, then make good on it. Don't spend that time on Facebook and tweeting, right? Use that time. So I don't think that you need to go about making big announcements. I don't think you need to beat your chest, and don't think you need to slam the door and I'm so busy, I can't be interrupted.
Well, it's
create the create the atmosphere that you work best in, and then create the expectation that that's just how you do things. And then people kind of leave you alone once you show that you can do it that way.
Yeah. Especially once you do that last step, right? Really demonstrate the value of what conditions you require to be successful. Because what I hear from a lot of young women is that in the beginning of our careers, without a proven track record, without power, without authority, it's hard, right?
You do have to balance it, particularly when you're starting out. I like to call it. I did a lot of Girl Friday stuff. Who'll do that? Oh, Brigid will do it. Yeah, and there is a measure of proving yourself.
Right.
But I will say for women, what you need to watch out for is that woman, you will never prove yourself in this current environment. Women, social science research shows we are forced to prove it again and again and again. And it's like, if we fail once, it's sort of like, people think, oh, you've really screwed up. If a guy fails up, it's just like, well, he made a mistake, but he's got real promise. You have to understand that there are those unconscious biases out there. Right. Sometimes you can name them. Sometimes you just, you'll run up against it. What I would say though, as a former Girl Friday, is that, you know what, when it comes around for your performance evaluation or
Mm-hmm.
your promotions or your raises or good work, people don't remember Girl Fridays. There is such a thing as recency syndrome. So, the person who's writing your performance evaluation typically doesn't remember everything that happened in the last year because they're really busy and overloaded. So they're
Right.
thinking about like the last 2 weeks.
Right.
So this is where you need to be really strategic. I say this as a former Girl Friday. Yes, be helpful, be a team member, particularly when you're starting out, be indispensable. But even as you're indispensable, keep in mind what it is you want, where it
Mm-hmm.
is you're going, and create space. It doesn't have to be every day, if you're really
Right.
busy.
Right.
Start with like 30 minutes a week for something that like a project or an idea or something that's really meaningful and important to you, because, it's going to make the experience of work feel better. It's going to make it much more meaningful when you're working on something that you really care about.
That's awesome. And that it sort of sounds like the skill we're talking about here is being able to draw healthy boundaries. And those look different for lots of people. It looks different for different people, but that is sort of what Bossed Up Bootcamp and the skills that we're working on helping women develop is how to actually go about doing that. And it starts with yourself, and then it starts with conditioning others on how you will tolerate being treated, which can
Well,
be, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say and I think that's what's really important. A lot of times, we read these articles. It's like, well, women are like this, men
Right.
are like this.
Right.
And I think what's really important to understand is that humans are humans, and we can be culturally conditioned to do stuff. But you know what? Stuff can change. Our brains
Totally.
are plastic. Our brains can change. What we have to understand is a lot of these really are skills that you can learn and practice
Totally.
and get better at. And
Totally.
that, things like willpower, it's a muscle. These things are like muscles. The more you use them, the better you get at it. And so, you're never going to get better if you never try. And you think, oh, I'm a woman, so I could never do this. Challenge that assumption as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, use it as a muscle, develop it. And, just as you're learning these skills yourself, I think what's really important is to develop a network of support. Something like
Yes.
this, friends in the workplace, or even, a virtual community.
Yeah.
I think the lean-in circles are fantastic for a lot of
Yeah.
women. Find a network of support, like-minded people who will help you understand that you're not crazy. You know what I mean? Because it is kind of a
Totally.
crazy environment for women, and also just for people who are trying to live a good life in this kind of crazy, unsustainable work environment.
Yeah. And I'm thrilled that people like you are helping us fix it. We could talk about the macro level stuff too, which I think is really fascinating. But I feel like I started Bossed Up after having worked in politics, frankly, because I don't have the patience for Congress right now, which I don't think anybody does, right? So what we do here is get real practical. We help women beat burnout and navigate career transition. And so I want to talk about that latter part now. You worked for over 15 years at the same place, Washington Post and Washington Post Magazine. And by no means does that mean that there was a dull moment along that time. I want to ask you.
There were.
Well, I want to ask you, how did you sustain that? What was the choice, or what did the entry point look like for those of us just starting out? And then how did that relationship with work change over those 15 years? And you are 2 weeks into a new position. So tell us what career transition looked like for you, or job transition looked like for you most recently too. So take that in whatever direction you'd like.
Yeah. Well, change is scary. Transitions are scary and they're hard, but they really are it's like if you stop growing, if you stop changing, you kind of die, whether spiritually or in, mentally or whatever. And I think one of the things that was always so wonderful to me about being a journalist and a writer is that every day was different.
Right.
There might be there's sort of the same structure. You write and you report and you tell people what's going on, or you come up with a story and you're a storyteller. But every story is different. Every experience is different. You're meeting different people. You write for different sections. So there was enough change through the years that it never got boring. It never got old. And this position at New America came very much as a result of my experience here as a fellow while I was working on the book. And then also just diving into these issues and realizing we really haven't had significant conversations about it. There are very few people. There are more now, but when I started reporting the book, very few people were even writing about these in an elevated way. They were still sort of seen as kind of women's issues, not that
Right.
important. And I think one of the things that I hope my book did was really broaden this and make it a very broad conversation. Everybody's feeling overworked and overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Whether you're a man or a woman, or you have caregiving responsibilities, wherever you are on the socioeconomic spectrum.
Right.
And so, you know, so this transition became kind of a really normal one for me then, when, you know, I had and then the book kind of expanded the universe. And then this was sort of like, this took me in a different direction. It was just a wonderful opportunity that came up. I think that's the most important thing is, kind of, you know, you got to trust your gut, you know, your gut really, that's sort of like that internal compass, that internal, I don't know, map, if you will.
Yeah.
And, you know, and you know, when you're ready for a change, you know, when you're like, oh, I've done this a lot, you know, yeah, for me, Saturday duty, I was so done doing cop checks on Saturday duty. It's like, I just don't think I can do this anymore. And but for a long time, there was enough that was challenging and fun. And I don't want to say, you know, Saturday duty is why I left. You know, there was this opportunity that opened up because, you know, and I don't know, the workplace and the work culture really is changing. Very few people today, I think, are expecting to be at a place as long as I was at the Boston Post. I've had very few jobs, if you will, in my career. And yet, even being at the same place, I've had several careers. And I think if you're going to be at a place for a while, that's a good way to think about it. You're not just the same thing, but you're, you know, constantly learning new skills, constantly trying new things, constantly growing. And when you can't grow at the same place anymore, then it is time to think about change, think about moving.
Awesome. And it goes back to what you said initially about getting clear on your mission. Like, what is it, you know, follow your nose, so to speak, until you know, find what your interests, where the interests and mission can align, and getting clear and purposeful about that. Because you clearly went from reporting on a whole variety of subject matter to really diving deep into what became your book and what has become this new job. So that I think is a really interesting takeaway for those of us who haven't been in anywhere for 15 years already, to really think about. It's like, A, follow your nose, trust your gut, and be deliberate about making it a mission, which is really helpful.
And that it's okay not to know, you know, and it's okay to kind of take a chance and even be wrong, you know. And when I came over here, I just thought, you know what, I was really paranoid for a while. It's like, I don't know if this is the right thing, you know. The Post's been my home. There's a lot that I love about it. And I remember talking to somebody and they said, you know what, it's not the right step or the perfect step or the best step, but it's the next step.
Right.
And I think that when, you know, I do tend to have those kind of perfectionist qualities, and, you know, and that has, leads to a lot of procrastination, can really hold you up as well. But when you think of things as the next step, it's a new thing. It's something new to learn.
Right.
It doesn't have to be right or wrong or like amazing or terrible, you know. That is the next thing. It kind of takes a lot of the you know, that horrible, you know, terrible tension out of it.
Yeah. So tell us about maybe a misstep along the way. Tell us about a time when you weren't feeling very good about career.
Which one? Which one?
I actually love how you weave the personal and the practical and the data-driven sort of all equally throughout Overwhelm, because it is very personal, the journey that you went on. And also for a data geek like me, full of facts and research, which is showing your journalistic creds on display. But, you know, for those of us who come to Bossed Up or who join webinars like this one because our life is confetti, you know, we are feeling kind of bummed, to say the least, or depressed or isolated, just to exaggerate it. Can you tell us about a challenge that you've overcome or a time in your life when you saw your way off of a track that wasn't right?
Yeah, I know. I sort of laugh. I was like, you know, which mistake? You know, honestly, you could look at this whole book. I think as we were talking before this started, you know, when some young people come, why should I read your book? And I said, learn from my mistakes. You know, don't do what I did. I mean, I don't want to say my whole life was a mistake.
No.
But, you know, look, I totally drank the Kool-Aid. I totally bought into the workaholic culture. I really thought the more you worked, the better you'd be. And, even though I could see that not happening, the projects, I think one of the hardest things, I was telling somebody, the hardest thing when I left the Washington Post was going through my filing cabinet. And it was really, it was horrible. It's like I would take out like a gigantic file folder with lots of notes, ideas, and notes, and interviews, and that would have been a good story. into the garbage can. Like in another one, that was going to be a great project. Into the garbage can. So I mean, that was terrible. The feeling that there were great things that I, kind of didn't follow through on, or I didn't, I didn't finish for a lot of reasons. And some of it was probably confidence, not necessarily having people or mentors or sponsors that could help me kind of pull it off. So I do think that I would encourage people to look for sponsors, not mentors. I think I had mentors. And mentors are the people that you go into their office and you cry and they give you napkin, Kleenex, and then you leave and you might feel better, but nothing changes. A sponsor is somebody who gets you, who sees your potential, is going to be talking you up behind your back and making sure if you've got like some big project and you don't know how to do it, they're going to be like, let me help you. They're going to help you clear the way. So look for sponsors and be helpful to them and let them be helpful to you. I think that's a really key message for women. I guess the other thing is I didn't use my time. I got so busy and I got, that Girl Friday doing things for other people that I didn't create that time early in the morning to like work for, a half hour on some big project. And, looking back at the lesson I learned through my book, there was a time when I was like, oh my God, I don't know how to write a book. Oh my God, I don't know how to do it. And I started by setting a timer for 30 minutes and I would do a little bit at a time. And it's amazing if you do a little bit at a time. Maybe a lot of those gigantic files that I ended up having to throw away might have actually been stories that, maybe they wouldn't have changed the world, but, they would have at least seen the light of day and not been shredded.
Yeah. Well, I think that sort of potential, we all have more potential than we will ever realize, right? There's also a component there of like, I'm so sick of guilt. Like I'm so over guilt that I feel like when regret and guilt or whatever you might, call it, the fear of future regret is a very motivating force in terms of getting shit done, frankly. But there's a counterbalance to that that's actually in our manifesto. We have the Bossed Up Manifesto, which says, forgive yourself now for the less than perfect decisions you'll make. Because that is a heavy burden to carry. And so I want to end on a positive note, if we may. And feel free to comment on that if you want. But I want to first encourage our ladies, now is the time to ask your questions. I'm seeing this amazing conversation going back and forth of sharing resources and tips, and I love it. Use that chat bar now to ask your questions for Brigid, and we will go there next. But Brigid, tell us about the good life. What does it look like? How are you working to make it possible at New America?
Well, I'm doing two things at New America, which is really fun. We have a sort of a work-life program, and we call it the Breadwinning and Caregiving Program. And so this is where we really look broadly at, how do you make this kind of change to, where you have more gender equality and, at work and at home. And the Good Life Initiative is something that I'm starting up that, as humans, we learn by stories and we learn by role models. And especially when you look at change, that's one of the reasons why in the book I have little chapters, I call them chapterlets, on bright spots. Yeah. Because we tend to think that, change isn't possible. And so I wanted to find real world examples of how it is. Right. And again, use research and real world examples. And so that's a lot of what I want to do here at New America, is to continue looking for unearthing not only the struggles and the problems and really understanding them, but highlighting where things are changing, how we can leverage that change. So there'll be a lot of writing and reporting. There's some really cool projects that we've got working, and some really interesting events and speaking and roundtables, and awesome. Really working to change the narrative, open minds and eyes, and really get some movement.
I love it. And everything you just said from your book reminds me of this book with, I don't know if you've seen Switch by Chip
Oh, I
and
love
Dan.
them. Yes.
I
Love them.
adore these researchers too. So ladies, if you're interested in understanding change leadership, how to change when change is hard, it informs everything we've put out in terms of the Bossed Up Life Tracker, which is our system for like goal management, essentially. And it really has to do a lot with how we sustain change by looking at the bright spots and applying them to our lives, which is great because right now, globally, there are some huge bright spots. So America's got some room to improve, I think, for sure.
Yes.
Amazing. So let's see. I'm seeing that our ladies are cheering each other on here, which is exciting. And I'm just going to zoom up here and just see. We've got a lot of goals. One of our community members from Dover, New Hampshire, says that her goal for this season, we have this 10-week challenge that we're a part of, is to stop playing the catch-up game, stop reacting and being more proactive, which I thought was so appropriate because she said that at the top of the hour. And I wonder if you have any tools or tactics or words of advice for her. I'm a huge fan of calendars as a reflection of our values. Just like people can say, give me your budget and I'll tell you your values. I think of a calendar as our budget for time. And we can use it proactively, we can use it reactively, paper, digital, whatever works. I like to say, and this is so important, it's right in our manifesto as well, schedule your fun and your fitness just like you schedule work meetings. It's just like a singular, practical way to actually reflect what you want to do proactively in your calendar. I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
Yeah, that whole catch-up game. I would say two things, your calendar and also your to-do list. What gets scheduled gets done. So I think what's really important is to take that time to pause, jump off the gerbil wheel.
Right.
Figure out what's most important to you at work, at home, and at play. You need that time to refresh your soul, to be most fully human, whether it's rest or fun. Everybody, come on, we're only alive once, right? For a limited time only. And, life is supposed to be, there is joy.
Right.
So what gives you joy? Schedule that, and then give yourself permission to do it. I think women we think that, and there's been research on this, we think that we do not deserve that kind of time. We don't deserve to do the big project. We have to earn it. And you know what? It's time to say no. We deserve it. Do the big project at work. You deserve to have fairness in your division of labor at home, and you deserve this time to really be the best person that you can be, because you're going to do your work better, and you're going to be a better person in your relationships with your family, your friends, and your community. And I guess the last thing I'd say about the to-do list, I used to live under what I call the tyranny of the to-do list. And if you read one of the chapters, I was working with a time management coach.
Yeah.
Like, all right, what are you going to do by our meeting next week? And I gave her this list that from here to eternity of everything I ever needed to do for the rest of my life. And the first thing she said the next week, she was laughing. She just goes, "Oh, well, so how long did it take for you to figure out that you couldn't get that done in a week?" And I guess what I realized all along is I knew that I couldn't get that done. And yet I still put that expectation on myself. So then the whole week long, I created this tension and this pressure that I was behind, that I was inadequate, that I couldn't do enough. And that was all self-created.
Yeah.
So I used to say, burn your to-do list, but don't, because they're very helpful. but use it strategically, and that list of everything, consider it a brain dump. That's what David Allen calls it.
Yeah.
Get it out of your head, because it's good, because then your brain doesn't have to expend energy trying to remember. But then choose one thing to do, or choose 5 things, choose one thing a day, 5 things a week. You know what I mean? It's exactly. Right. Don't try to do it all. Yeah. And then, what's amazing is that then it frees you from that sense of always being behind and that you got to catch up.
Right.
I am in a position right now. I am struggling with that very thing. And so I want to tell you right now, I'm very much a work in progress. I'm feeling like, if I could just finish all this stuff, then I could do that. And I'm fighting that right now. You know what? Do a little bit at a time and make time for the big stuff.
I love it.
Don't wait. Don't do the if-then mentality.
I know. And it's we create our own guilt, which then creates more paralysis and more negative emotions, which distract us, quite frankly. I'm a big fan of David Allen too. Getting Things Done has a cult-like following, I'm pretty sure.
Yes, he's awesome.
And
He is
he's
awesome.
the to-do list master. And I just want to add that for those who've downloaded our Bossed Up Life Tracker, it's the 20-page ebook we have for free at bossedup.org. It's all over the website, and then every blog post you can see on the right-hand side, you can download it. That was definitely inspired by just getting it out of your head so that you can then be proactive about prioritization. And that's the name of the game. I love that. Research, the cognitive science behind long-term goal attainment is the things that I nerd out over the most. So I love this conversation, and I think this is so brilliant. So we have a couple of great questions here. Congrats on having Overwhelm chosen as the Nonfiction Literary Award winner of the year by the Library of Virginia. Congratulations, Brigid.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's lovely.
It's fantastic. Question for you. What's the first thing you do when you wake up? Do you set an intention of the day? And this is from Priyanka, who I believe is in DC.
You know what I do? The very first thing that I do is I think of 3 things that I'm grateful for. And then exercise my feet. I've that is, I've made that a habit. And, there's really interesting neuroscience behind that as well. It's made a huge difference for me, even in such a small way. Our brains are really wired to look for the negative.
Yes.
That's how we survived, right? Always looking for threats,
right.
Scan for threats. And I remembered when I first started doing it, it was so much easier to think of all the things that were going wrong. I'm like, oh my God, what am I grateful for? I can't think of anything. And now it's really easy, and it's
good.
What you're doing is you're actually retraining your brain to look for the things that you're grateful for, the positive. And then when you're in a positive mood, there's research that shows that you have more energy, that you're more open, you're more curious, you'll get more ideas, you'll get into flow easier. It just makes it good for the day. The first thing, I guess my intention is to be grateful.
I love that. That's beautiful. Well, my first thing needs some improvement then, because actually it's turning on NPR, which you can tell your husband. I wake up to NPR every morning, but I'll have to add that in, because that sounds like a really, really powerful practice. Thank you for the question, Priyanka. We also have a question here about the eternal debate of the working mother. Can we have Brigid talk a bit about her work and family, particularly child raising and balance? Now, this is such a loaded topic, right? Because work-life balance has always been shouldered by women as the debate. And I think it's interesting to look at breadwinning and caregiving from that perspective, that you are holistically as a society. What do we value? How do we value it? And I want to note that a lot of our ladies are on the cusp of making child rearing decisions, right? We tend to have college degree holding 29-year-old women in our midst who are really starting to get practical about, okay, if I feel this overwhelmed as is, where's there room in my life for a child? And is that something I can really do? What do you say to that question?
I've been there. I know what that feels like, and it's a terrible place to be. And that's, and when I was there wasn't anybody talking about this. And
right.
And I'm here for you because I know how awful that is.
Yeah.
You know what? It sucks, and it needs to change, because we are the only advanced economy that really, we have no paid parental leave. It's us in Swaziland and Papua New Guinea. I mean, come on, and you've got lawmakers, you've got John Boehner saying this is this is for whiny middle class and, who are entitled. It's really not. It's for everybody. It's about setting the family dynamic. It's about getting started. It's about bonding with a child. It's about setting the next generation off on a good start. So we absolutely need paid parental leave. There's great research out of California that shows that it's not just good for middle class people, but that it's really important for those low wage workers. If they have that paid leave, they tend to breastfeed longer. They're healthier. Their babies are healthier. Their families are stronger. And women tend to go back to work rather than go on public assistance or lose all their money or end up on a park bench.
Right.
So we really need to rethink the way we think about the next generation, the way we support our families in this country.
Right.
We need to have these kinds of conversations about paid leave, about high quality childcare. We have a really sucky childcare system in this country. There is excellent childcare, high quality childcare. It's very expensive. And it's very hard to get into, and it's not everywhere. So not everybody has access to it.
horrified about that. More than anything in your book, that really opened my eyes. I thought I knew a bunch about women and public policy, but read Overwhelmed to learn about the terrifying state of childcare regulations and just the status of, and not to mention the important history around the last attempt to get funding on a public level for childcare. Because I think if we know that history, and I can't speak to it perfectly, I think that's a longer conversation for another day, but if we know that history, we may be able to better fight for it.
It'll make you mad. It would make you mad, because the reason we do not have universal child care, there was a bill that passed both houses of Congress in the early 1970s. And the only reason we do not have universal access, high quality, affordable child care on a sliding scale with highly trained, well-paid teachers is because the conservative right wing, led by Pat Buchanan, thought that it would destroy the family and turn us into the Soviet Union.
Yes.
It was all a Cold War fear.
Yes.
And then you follow that with these crazy stories about how there were pedophiles in daycare and devil worshippers. So there's just been this crazy stigma about childcare. So if the system doesn't work, that's sad. Okay, I understand that. I was able to find really great childcare for my kids. Yes, it was expensive. A year of infant care is more expensive than a year of public college in more than 30 states.
Wow.
That's appalling. That is something that we all need to work together on a big scale. All right. But you know what? I will say, you live on a small scale, you live your life. You can find good choices. You have to look, you have to band together with others. You know, you have to find that network of support.
It takes a village. Yeah.
I will say, having children was the best thing I ever did in my life. And I did. I waited till it was almost too long, or almost too late. And I would encourage you, don't wait. Don't wait till it's too late. Make the best decisions that you can. But at some point, unfortunately, you just have to make a leap of faith.
Yeah.
And I did that, and I took long leaves, and I don't know if we could afford it. I never did the budget. I just did it. And, yes, we ran up our credit cards, but you'll never have that time back again. So there are things that you can do personally. And I think what we need to do is move the conversation out of, everybody has to make these ad hoc personal decisions. And we really need to make it much more of a conversation about all of us, because it's really hard on families.
You're raising the rabble here, because I really, I Bossed Up is a nonpartisan entity, and so
we're nonpartisan here at America.
Right.
And I think it's really important that we find common ground solutions that we can all work together toward. Right. And that's one of the things that I'm working on here, is putting together can we have a conversation across our political differences and stop shouting at each other? Yeah. What can we all agree on that we value? And I think when we start coming at this conversation from a values question, rather than political ideology, then I think maybe we can, make some of that change.
So, I'm optimistic with women like you at the helm. I'm optimistic. So
but I've got a Republican on my staff. I mean, it's not about politics. It's about what works. It's about what works for people.
I love it. All right. Well, I do want to be respectful of everybody's time. And so I want to thank you, Brigid, for joining us today. I want to give a shout out to the fact that this conversation can and likely will continue on social media. So if you haven't had a chance to get your question answered, tweet at bossedup.org and at Brigid Schulte. That is BRIGIDSCHULTE. Is that right?
Right.
Okay. And so we'll give you a tweet on, we Instagrammed out at Brigid this morning, and we'll be tweeting throughout the rest of the day. I am so encouraged by and inspired by your work, Brigid. I'm so grateful for the time you spent with us today. And I know I can speak on behalf of our bosses that this conversation and, yes, the book, which was just mentioned, is an amazing intersection for us between what we can do in our personal lives and how those choices amount to the body politic, to our collective choices. So thank you so much. We must absolutely continue this conversation soon.
Thank you so much for having me. And I guess that would be the final word that I would say, is that when I started it, I didn't think things could change. I didn't see how they could be different. And now I've done the